Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to aidsmapLIVE, our very special broadcast about COVID vaccines and HIV. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by an incredible panel of people who will be on in a moment. But first of all, I'd like to bring on NAM's Executive Director, Matthew Hodson, who's going to be taking questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Susan. I was when we got the news last week that people with HIV were going to be prioritised, and instantly I saw on social media some of the responses from people, and there was a lot of fear, there were a lot of questions. And I've always thought that NAM's role was to be able to support living with HIV by providing accurate and accessible information. So although Susan was actually meant to be on holiday this week, I said, can we just do one extra aidsmapLIVE before we go to Christmas? Because it's such an urgent need, and this is a real opportunity for us to really help and support the health of people living with HIV. So that's why we're doing this very special broadcast. We're here to answer your questions. The panel will be taking the questions live. I'll be beavering away backstage. So if you do want to ask a question of the panel, just post it under the broadcast on Facebook or under the tweet on Twitter, and I will get that question to Susan.
Right, thank you. Wonderful. So if we can have on the first guest, just for a quick hello, Dr. Vanessa Apea.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Vanessa. Wonderful to have you on.
Thank you.
Vanessa, you're an HIV consultant at Barts Hospital. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. Yes.
Very busy time for you at the moment, I can imagine.
Yeah, life is very busy there. Yes. But yeah, we're surviving.
Wonderful. I'm sure we're going to have lots and lots of questions for you. So see you in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Next, I would like to bring on Mercy Shibemba.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Mercy. Wonderful to have you on.
Thank you for
Mercy
having
is
me.
a multi-award-winning HIV activist and co-chair of the Sophia Forum. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Wonderful. So Mercy has her ear to the ground about issues that young people living with HIV have been sharing. So really keen to hear your insights in a moment. So thank you, Mercy. Next, Dr. Rageshri Dhairyawan.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Rageshri. Wonderful to have you on. Rageshri is also an HIV consultant at Barts Health. Is that right?
That's right. My office is next to Vanessa's.
Wonderful. That's absolutely brilliant. So thanks very much. Got lots and lots of questions for you. And finally, the Reverend Jide Macaulay.
Hi, Susan. How you all doing? Thank you so much for inviting me. I am the founder of House of Rainbow, and I'm also a priest in the Church of England. So I'm really happy to be on the program today, not just as a person living with HIV, but someone who recently was diagnosed with COVID-19 and going through the first phase of dealing with it.
Wonderful. So thank you very much, Jide. But if we can have all of our guests on now, please. Wonderful. Thanks very much. Well, we've already had so many questions sent over. But first of all, I think I'll pose this initially to Rageshri. I mean, what's the latest that we're hearing about how COVID-19 affects people with HIV? Because it seems to be changing so much.
I think at the moment the consensus is that it still hasn't changed, in that if someone has stable HIV on treatment with a good CD4 count, that it shouldn't affect people more. But obviously we're still getting more data from around the world, which is giving us more information on this. I think there has been some studies that have shown that people living with HIV may do worse from COVID, but in those studies there have been people who've had more comorbidities, so more diabetes, more chronic kidney disease. So it seems that it may be those comorbidities that might be causing the poorer prognosis rather than HIV itself.
Oh, wonderful. And Vanessa, I think you led on a study at your hospital.
Yeah.
What did you find?
So it was a study, and Rageshri was in the group as well. And so we looked at the outcomes of COVID-19 for the people that had been admitted to Barts Health hospitals. And we looked at the differences in outcome across different ethnicities. And what we saw there is that those from Black and Asian ethnicity had higher rates of death, unfortunately. And it was also at a younger age as well. So we saw these outcomes within our populations in East London.
Yeah, and I mean, we're hearing a lot that people of colour seem to be affected worse by COVID. Why do you think that is?
I think that so many reasons have been put forward, and I think the key thing that I always highlight about this is that when people think about race and ethnicity, they instantly think of biology. So it must be something biological that's causing this difference. And what we always urge in this is that that isn't the case, that race and ethnicity are not biological constructs, they're social constructs. And so when we look at that, you can't look at those in isolation. You've got to think about the social context in which people live and how that impacts their outcomes. So that's what we believe, is that there are a number of structural inequalities that have driven these differences that we see in different ethnicities.
Would you like to add to that, Rageshri?
So just to agree with everything Vanessa has said, and I think there's more data coming across from America that kind of everyday racism or the everyday discrimination that people might face can cause a long-term stress on the body, which can almost cause like an accelerated aging or weathering of the body. And this just means that people therefore may not deal with COVID as well as people who don't experience that everyday discrimination.
Right, okay, thank you. And Jide, you currently have COVID. As someone living with HIV, what's that been like for you?
It's actually been horrible, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It happened a week ago, so I thought I had the flu because I already had my flu jab, which I normally take every year. So I had the flu jab, so I thought, okay, this is unusual. So I was really exhausted. It really took me down. I think I immediately started to take care of myself. I always have like a course of day and night nurse tablets that I would take. So I started taking that, and then of course 2 days later, I decided to go take the COVID test, and it came back as positive. So it meant that I had to continue to isolate. Now, of course, all the symptoms of COVID, most of them were present, like the high temperature, the muscle pain and the cough, and I didn't actually have chills. I didn't have nausea. I was not vomiting or anything like that. But I think that the other thing I also did not have is I didn't lose my taste bud. I can still taste. I can still smell. But I do get really, really tired, such that, I didn't want to do anything else but just rest. So the first and only thing that I'm doing today is actually this interview and this program, because I just lay down throughout the day. My appetite is also very slow, but I've been keeping up with meals because I have to eat, to survive and also to keep up with my medication. So it has been burdensome. And I think that the other side of it is just being at home. And I know that sometimes you want to go out and you're feeling bored, but I'm actually thinking about protecting other people as well, because it doesn't make sense in me going out. So I'm staying put at home. So,
and
go on.
Would you say that there's like, particularly in Black communities, perhaps a bit of stigma around COVID?
There is a lot of stigma around it already, and I have already been stigmatized. Someone sent me a message saying congratulations for getting COVID, and I wasn't sure what that meant, but I think that there is a stigma around it, and I recognize that stigma as someone living with HIV. So again, I think that for me, I've dealt with it and I'm dealing with it now, and that is why I decided to speak publicly about COVID itself.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mercy, how do you think young people living with HIV are regarding COVID?
Yeah, I think it's a worry, but it's also that thing of a lot of young people feel that obviously this is something that has affected older populations more greatly, and so some people are like, well, it's not going to affect me, so why do I need to take a vaccine? I've seen a lot of things flying around WhatsApp that are quite worrisome, and I think it's really important in how we respond to that. Instead of shaming people, actually inviting them in to have a conversation about, the speed at which this has been rolled out and why some groups are a priority. I think there's been some miscommunication around that, and who should go forward first for it, type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, and thank you for raising the issue of misinformation in WhatsApp groups. I mean, that's something that I've been seeing, particularly in communities of people of colour. Rageshri, why do you think these things are being shared so widely?
So I think they're being shared, and I think they're being shared in a well-meaning fashion. So it's from friends and family who want to share information they think is important. So I think that's important to realise that it's not being shared out of malice in most cases. I think there is a legacy. There is a large history of medical experimentation and exploitation, and that, along with institutional violence from institutions, not just healthcare, all those things can leave a legacy of distrust in communities, which can continue for generations. And it's a very valid concern that people have. So I think that as doctors, it's really important that we speak to our patients and talk to them about the vaccine and acknowledge any concerns or mistrust that they may have, so we can give proper information that's correct.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing that I'm hearing in terms of people being offered the vaccine, one myth going around at the moment is that people of colour are being experimented on because of the vaccines. What would you say to people who are feeling that way?
So what I would say is that the vaccines have been through all the usual clinical trials that all vaccines have been through. So they've been tested on thousands of people. So for example, the Pfizer vaccine that has just been licensed and is being rolled out at the moment, in the phase 3 trials, 43,000 people had the vaccine over 6 countries. So they go through the normal regulation and safety rules that every vaccine does, but of course it's very quick, and that's because of a lot of funding and resource being put into develop it and less red tape that we normally see.
Okay, thank you. And we're already getting some great questions coming through. How many people with HIV have been involved in the vaccine studies, and has the data on these participants been reported yet?
I'm happy to start with that. So I think that one of the things that Rageshri so rightly had highlighted is that the pathway of the studies has been as rigorous as always. And as one of the first things within a study is that you will do the study in what you'll call so-called healthy volunteers, so with no other comorbidities, and particularly in the early studies for the vaccine trials, they even things like weight. So as we know, with COVID, there's been an association with poor outcomes and weight. So there was quite strict criteria about entering. So you had to be below a BMI of, I believe, 30 for a number of the trials. Then as it went through the first phase, and it was found that it was safe within so-called healthy volunteers, they then opened it up. So studies have now opened up for those that are living with HIV to participate. In terms of the numbers, I can say that I believe for the Oxford vaccine trial, they had at least 60 that were available for people living with HIV, and not all the data has been reported, but we do know that there have been numbers of people living with HIV involved in the studies, both here and in the US as well.
Okay. Thank you. I've got a question over from Dale in the US. about, are people living with HIV but undetectable considered immunocompromised and therefore a high risk group? But I would like to ask as well, particularly in the UK, when will people with HIV be offered the vaccine? And would you say that there is a difference between the UK and the US in that respect?
Go, Vanessa.
Interject at any point, but just to say, so if we're using the United Kingdom, so easy for us. So there are different priority groups that have been put together, and for people living with HIV and have an undetectable viral load, they're in group 6. Now, if for those with a lower CD4 count, less than 50, I believe it is, then they will move to a group 4. Now, in terms of the timing as to when everything will be rolled out and how quick we'll move from group 4 to 6, I think we don't have the details of that yet. As you can imagine, with the rollout of vaccines, it's a huge logistical process, and it's just identifying everyone and then getting the vaccines out to everyone. So there is a process, and we don't have the clear timelines onto that. All we know is that different groups of people have been ranked together, and we're going to be moving through those groups. Can you remind me, you said about America?
Yeah, just in the USA, do you know what the situation's going to be in relation to people with HIV being regarded as a high risk group and being offered the vaccine potentially earlier?
So from what I know, and I think the reason that I know stuff about it in the US is that I've also been really interested in the discussions that they've been having in terms of vaccine hesitancy and encouraging all communities, and particularly people of color, to become involved in trials and take up the vaccine. And what I understand is that they are also still working through the process of how to roll out the vaccines. And I don't think that there's been a clear guidance yet for each group.
Mm-hmm. And a really good question that's come through that I will ask each of you, but don't feel that you have to answer. But I'll start off with Jide and Mercy. Would you have the vaccine when it's offered to you? Wait, Jide, do you want to go first, and then we'll move to Mercy?
I've thought carefully about this, and I said to myself, I will take the vaccine. I have read enough about it. I have listened to scientific instructions, guidelines, and evidence, and two of my favorite HIV consultants are on this panel as well. So, and on a serious note, and I think that people need to know the source of the information that they're getting. Let me make no mistake. I will take the vaccine when it is offered to me. And I think this is an act of responsibility in itself. It is an act of responsibility as a leader within my community, within the community of people living with HIV, within the religious communities, to show example. And of course, there are, we've already talked about this, there are so many different messages that are going on in WhatsApp group that needs to be demystified. People's mind need to be put at rest. I mean, yesterday, there was a news on the BBC that says that, that Black Asian minority ethnic people, about 57% said they will not take the vaccine. I think that is very unfair because of the misconception of the information. One thing that I will say is that politics has also messed things up, to be quite honest. I think that the language of the politicians has also impacted how Black people have reacted to the vaccine. You don't say, oh, we now have a vaccine, Black people come to the front. That is not a good way to communicate the message. You understand me? But I think I like what they're doing now. So those who are more vulnerable, 80-year-old and so on and so forth, they're staircasing it. And hopefully when it gets to my turn, I will be lining up, gracefully to get the vaccine.
And Mercy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting that Indonesia has said that young people are going to be amongst the first in their country to get the COVID vaccine. But also, as just a person living with HIV, I'm so grateful to be able to live in a country where actually I will have access to that soon. I know in speaking to my cousins back home in Zambia, you know, they're like 2022, 2023 and beyond. And, you know, as someone living with HIV, not everybody has access to medication. Not everybody has the guarantees of, oh, I'll get the vaccine, oh, I can get access to treatment. And I think that it's really important that we do have these conversations and that we're open and honest about our concerns and our frustrations and are able to talk them through.
No, absolutely, and thank you for raising that. I was having a chat with someone from Stop AIDS today who pointed out that the vast majority of people in poor countries, you know, won't have access to the vaccine for ages. I mean, the inequality between rich and poor countries is absolutely shocking. And what can we do to fight this injustice? Does anyone have any ideas?
To be quite honest, I think the first thing is to make it more accessible to people, because I'm sure that, you know, industries like the airline industries or even government might include it as one of the criteria for you to get a visa if you want to come to their country. And not everybody will be able to do that. At the moment, people returning to South Africa have to take a COVID test privately that costs £170. Not everybody have access to that kind of money just to get a clear test, just to get on an aeroplane to go to South Africa. So the inequality is going to be more blatant as we move forward. But I think that the important thing, honestly, is for people to know that there's an opportunity for them to test and there's access for them to get it. I'm on the same page with Mercy and grateful that I live in a country where it can be offered to me, where I can say yes rather than say no.
Yeah,
wonderful.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that it is it's scary to think that we're going to have a vaccine that's available, and again we're going to see a real disproportionate rollout again. So what we're going to see is that the global south isn't going to have access to it in the same way. And for me, so one of the problems is that there is this perception in the global south that the impact of COVID hasn't been the same and we haven't been seeing the same numbers. And that is true, but we're also all very aware that, are we sure that everyone is being tested, that they should be tested? Not everyone, as Reverend Jide is saying, not everyone has access to the funds to pay for testing. And so if people aren't testing, you'll never know the true burden of infection in the country. So then it's easy for people to argue and say, oh, the vaccines aren't as important because the burden of infection isn't there. And I think that's wrong. I think that COVID is everywhere and everyone needs to have access to the vaccine.
Thank you.
Just to say, I agree as well. It's a global pandemic, so we should be approaching it as a global issue, and you can't, ignore some parts of the globe. And just to answer that question, the first question, I'm looking forward to having my vaccine, and I'm going to recommend it to my friends and family.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, Vanessa.
Yeah, definitely. That's all I've been doing on the phone this past week, is just encouraging everyone to take the vaccine. So no, definitely. And I just to highlight, so I've got one of the things is they talk about allergies, and I'm someone that has a lot of allergies, and so it's a concern for me, and doesn't mean I'm not going to take it. It just means that I have to go and have the conversation and work out, is this the vaccine I'm supposed to have, or do I need to be in the next round? And that's it. So be informed, get the information, but don't let it stop you to get the right vaccine for you.
And Kurt, talking in relation to that, if someone is allergic to abacavir, for instance, to get quite specific in terms of an HIV medication, would that count as the type of allergy that would stop them from perhaps being able to have the Pfizer vaccine? So
just to say, and I was having a conversation with some GPs about something similar yesterday, because they're rolling it out and they're having to think on their feet really quickly about this. So a lot of in terms of each allergy has been taken individually to understand what the severity of the allergy and how it impacted the individual. Now, something like abacavir, what is typically done is that they would then liaise with the vaccine team and then decide if it's appropriate for that person to continue to take it or not. And if it's not appropriate, then they wouldn't give it to them, and they would say either wait for the next round or wait for a different vaccine. But each one is taken individually, so it's not a blanket no for everyone, but it's taken individually. But
so suppose someone, so their HIV clinic knows that they're allergic to abacavir, but they get the call from their GP calling them to have the vaccine, who may not know about the hypersensitivity. What should they do in that situation?
So that's really important, and I think that number one in here, in many cases we would hope that the GP is aware in terms of communicating within from your clinic to your GP, but we know that isn't always the case. So that individual has to be that kind of conduit of the information. So I urge everyone to be aware of their full medical history of any allergies that they've had, so that they can communicate that to their GP, and then their GP will make the decision with them as to whether they're appropriate to have that vaccine.
Okay, thank you. We've got a great question from Peter. Are there any potential concerns about the interactions with the vaccines and ARVs that we know of?
So I can answer that one. It's quite straightforward. There are no potential concerns about interactions with ARVs.
Fantastic. That's great.
I don't have the answer to that, but I just was thinking that, my experience with HIV and COVID is go get the tests and just get to know, because I think I had COVID for 2 or 3 days before I actually took a test. And the same with HIV as well. Sometimes you don't have symptoms, sometimes you have symptoms, but go get a test. That's the only way you can know. You remove doubt, you eliminate fear, and early diagnosis means that you can begin treatment ASAP.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jide. One thing that Rageshri and I were discussing earlier was the fact that many people with HIV have fantastic relationships with their HIV team, who they may have known for many years, perhaps more so than their GP. What do you think the HIV healthcare professionals who might be watching, what do you think that they could be doing to help their patients who may be a bit hesitant about accepting the vaccine?
So I've been thinking about this quite a lot in the last couple of weeks, because I've really tried to have the conversation with every single patient that I've been in contact with. So I think the first thing is, one, raise the topic with every patient you see. So say the COVID vaccine is coming out now. Is that something you think you'd like to get? So start the conversation. And then I use that opportunity to find out if anyone's got any concerns about getting the vaccination, so that I can address any concerns or fears. And I'll also signpost, so I'll talk about the BEVA guidance about HIV and COVID vaccines, so that people can do some reading on their own from the right information. And I think it's important to acknowledge that people may have concerns, and that if people say, for example, that they've heard some conspiracy theories, it's important not to ridicule the person. So because these conspiracy theories come from a very real place of fear, so to take that into account, acknowledge it, and then try and reassure patients that it is misinformation. And for me, what I found really interesting is that for me, and not everyone will want to do this, but for me, telling each patient that I'm looking forward to my vaccine myself has been reassuring. And they've often said to me, well, if you're having it, then I'm definitely going to do it. And if they don't want to have it, it's not compulsory. You can talk to them again about it if they want to do their own research. And there's peer support as well. It's not just HIV clinicians who can give the right information. There are people living with HIV who can do that as well.
Okay. And Mercy, what do you think that we that work in the community can be doing to get these messages across?
Yeah, I think it's about speaking to people and actually having, conversations about it, and not avoiding the inequalities that stare us in the face. I know from so many activists I've spoken to, I spoke to someone in Brazil the other day, and they were like, people here living with HIV saying they're not going to get the vaccine just because the way that the government has handled this whole thing. And actually, it's about addressing that distrust in these institutions and these bodies that, are supposed to look after people, and saying, look, HIV has a long history for fighting for change and, doing the right thing, and this can be a step that we take to say, actually, we're going to do this, but we're also going to challenge you at the same time of why X, Y, and Z doesn't stack up in this.
Absolutely. And Jide, what do you think religious leaders can be doing to help with the messaging?
And I think religious leaders need to be working hand in hand with doctors, experts like Rageshri and Vanessa, to understand the principles of COVID, to understand why this vaccination is important. And I think that we saw at the beginning where some religious leaders and communities refuse to close down their religious centers because they believe that this is the work of the devil and things like that. But I think it's important to know that we are here to serve our communities, to make sure that they are in good health. I believe that religious leaders need to have a good understanding, a good knowledge. It is the same campaign and the same rhetoric that we put out as well around HIV. We need to put the same out for COVID as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I've got a question from Josh from London, and he asks whether the vaccine will be administered via HIV clinics.
I think that's a great question. I think that what we've seen in COVID is that probably bringing ourselves up in terms of sexual health and HIV, but just the nature of our services, we've been really flexible and responsive. And so we've been able to support things like contact tracing and scaling up of testing for many communities. So I think that could be a possibility. And I think it's definitely one of the reasons why I think it's definitely one to explore is it is that element of trust. And you can't underestimate that element of trust. And so if you want to go to somewhere where you feel, I know the people, I understand, I trust what they're saying, I would let them administer that to me, then I think that needs to be explored, definitely. And to pick up on one thing that Rageshri said is that it's about having the conversation, but often you may need to have the conversation more than once and reinforcing that conversation. So it may be that offering it in a different space where you're able to have that conversation repeatedly to support someone may be the right thing to do. So maybe watch this space.
And can I just...
I've heard, yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, I mean, as HIV doctors, we're also very much involved. So at the moment, we're going through our lists and trying to work out who would be in priority group 4, so kind of the more clinically vulnerable. So we're trying to inform them and their GPs, if we can, that they would fit in that group. So we are involved in some way at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. And do you think, I've heard that some people may be a bit worried about having the vaccine at their GP because it may out their HIV status because they are not, the age category. I mean, what would you suggest someone who's worried about that can do?
I would encourage them not to be worried. And the reason that I'm saying that is because, as I explained earlier, is that yes, there are certain groups that in terms of priority, but one of the things is that the vaccine itself has a short window of use. So if, let's say, we've booked to have 50 people to have it on a day, and then not all those 50 people are able to attend and have the vaccine. What many services are planning to do is to have a kind of reserve list. So to contact people and say, we weren't able to use up all the vaccine today, can you come in and have the vaccine? So it just because you will be going earlier doesn't mean that you would be, it would be assumed that you have another vulnerability to make for you to be in a higher group. So I would say that all services are just really trying to vaccinate as many people as possible. So please don't let that be the reason for you not to go and have the vaccine, and just see yourself as lucky to get in there a bit earlier.
Right. Okay. Great. Thank you.
I mean, I remember when COVID landed and the tests then started. You know, I had an idea, and I discussed it with other people. Say, well, whilst they're testing for COVID, couldn't they also test for HIV at the same time? But of course, you know, I don't want to infringe on people's civil liberty. But I think that honestly, testing for COVID and testing for HIV is actually part of, you know, ensuring that people know what their health status is. And hopefully, I don't know, I mean, maybe we can find a way to simplify this for everybody, that, you know, if you test for one, you might as well test for the other, and remove stigma once and for all. Easier said than done.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got another great question, just about some of the side effects. I'd like to talk a little bit more widely, but the question that's come over is, what is meant by injection site reaction? How severe is it? And is it more likely in people who have a history of hypersensitivity to HIV medications? So if we could deal with that particular side effect to start off with.
So I think in terms of injection site reactions, the most common one is just a feeling of pain in the arm. So for example, if you've had a flu vaccine, you might notice that you feel like someone might have hit your arm it normally lasts about a day and then it goes away. So that's probably the most common one. And there might be some slight irritation of the skin, but that's less common. So there's nothing more serious than that. There's no swelling or anything like that. The most common feeling is just a feeling of pain. With regards to hypersensitivity to HIV medications, I think, you know, that's something that Vanessa has already covered before, in that we don't know. There's no reason why you should get a more severe site reaction because you have hypersensitivity to HIV medications. But obviously we'll find out more as we go along. And if you have a history, as Vanessa said, we'll talk to the people administering the vaccine and there'll be a decision made.
Thank you. And what are the other side effects, potential side effects to the vaccines?
So the really common ones are perhaps feeling a bit of fatigue, maybe a slight fever, maybe some tiredness, and that tends to go after a day or a few days. So that's very common. It's not a sign of you getting COVID, it's a sign of your immune system reacting. So your immune system is waking up and it's creating the antibodies, which is exactly what we want it to do, the antibodies against COVID.
And suppose someone has COVID without realizing they have COVID, and then they have the vaccine, would anything happen?
Wouldn't expect anything to happen, because the way the vaccine works, it's not a live vaccine, so you're not giving more virus to the individual, and what it's doing is it's creating more antibodies, and if you have COVID, your body is doing that anyway.
So there's currently one vaccine that's that's out there already, and two more we're expecting imminently. What's the difference between them, and will people have any choice in terms of which vaccine they receive?
That's a good question. So in terms of the vaccines that's out at the moment and the one that's coming soon after. So just to take a step back from it, so with vaccines, what they're doing is that they're triggering your immune system to make antibodies in response to COVID. But there are different ways in which you can trigger and stimulate the immune system. And so the way that the one that is out at the moment is that it's an mRNA vaccine. So it uses mRNA to trigger your immune system. And so and any other ones that are coming out, it's using different ways of triggering the immune system. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of, for example, using myself as an example in terms of my history of allergies, and so this one may not be appropriate for me. As we have different vaccines coming out, we're learning what is the right one for it may be that ones coming out later may be more appropriate for people that have reactions and allergies as opposed to this one. So it's different ways of triggering the immune system, and it may be more appropriate for people with different disorders and different allergy profiles as well.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. And we've heard this week about new strain of the COVID virus. Will the vaccines work for this? And what is this new strain? Should we be scared?
Shall I go, Vanessa?
Yeah,
I can start. So we know that viruses, they naturally change. So a virus mutating or changing itself is very, very common with lots of viruses. And this particular strain that has been identified was actually first identified in April. So it's been around for a while, but it's been seen to be more common in the UK over the last couple of months. If you think of the virus itself, what it has on the outside surface are these little spikes, which are called spike proteins, and they use that to attach to cells so they can get into cells. And there's been a mutation in the genes for those spike proteins. And at the moment, I think we don't really know. There's no evidence so far that, for example, it can cause more serious COVID. But what we don't know is whether it may affect tests or it may affect vaccines. But as I said, viral mutations are common in many viruses, and vaccines tend to attack different areas. So we would expect vaccines to work, but if not, they can be tweaked. But, watch this space, we will find out more.
Right, okay. And in relation to the vaccines not working, I mean, we're hearing, it being 95% and then 65% effective. So do the vaccines not work for everyone, and is not working associated with other health conditions? That's a question that's come over.
I think one of the things is that, and sometimes I think it's because the language that is used to kind of communicate to everyone actually adds in more confusion for people. And there are whenever you're doing a trial, you have a certain line that you're trying to achieve that. Let's say you want to make sure that at least 50% of people will respond to the medication that you're giving to see a change. So any trial that happens has that threshold, and it has to go past that. And for any vaccine that is going to be signed off to say that it can be used, has to meet that threshold, number one. So I think that's really important to understand, so that if a vaccine is approved, it means that it has passed a number of scientific checks to make sure that it can work for most people. Now, for anything that we have in life, any medication, any vaccine, there is a possibility that for some it may not work as optimally for everyone. And I think that so that's where those issues of not working have come in, and that can sometimes cause confusion. What I would say is that we know that for the studies that have been done, and similarly with other flu vaccine studies, the vaccines work in the majority of people, and that is why it's been deemed safe to roll out and give to everyone. And we are monitoring people to see if there's any differences further down the line, but just know that the robust studies have been done, and it's safe to be used for the majority of people, and people will be monitored as well to make sure that they're mounting the right response that's needed to protect themselves from COVID.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a point for Vanessa and Rageshri. As an HIV patient myself, I have had to change my medication at least twice. I'm currently on the one now that worked for me perfectly well. Are we looking at the same thing as well with regards to COVID as well? Maybe one vaccine will not be good for all people, and then they have to, have a second one.
So I think with HIV, The British HIV Association released their statement last week, and it did say on the bottom that we know from other vaccines, so for example with hepatitis B, that it may not be as effective in people who have very low CD4 counts. So we'll always vaccinate people, but sometimes it may not work, and then we'll revaccinate them again once their CD4 count is higher. So we have that evidence around HIV from other vaccines. So I think at the moment, we don't know. And as we are now recruiting people living with HIV in COVID trials, I think we'll get more information. But as Vanessa said, with the next round of vaccines, it will be a different kind of vaccine, which perhaps may be more effective. So I think we need to wait and see, but there will be different options. So if one isn't as effective as in some people, there will be others coming, which may be better.
I've got some great questions coming over. Something that crossed my mind: how can you get on the one of these reserve lists for the vaccine?
What I was saying, I was thinking I could be opening the floodgates.
I'd like to know as well.
all the trusts will be coming through. So it's funny. As we've been talking, I've received a text from someone in a local borough that managed to get on a reserve list. Jokes aside, I think that letting your GP know that you would like the vaccine, and if there were a gap on a list that you would like to be considered, I think is important. And I think also, as Rageshri said, do be aware that we are doing our part within the HIV services, and we do have lists, and we are being proactive in contacting the GPs of those that are attending to make sure that they are acknowledged and prioritized as well. But I would say get in touch with your GP to make them aware that you're keen to receive the vaccine.
Okay, wonderful. And a couple of questions. Mercy, what celebrity for you do you think would encourage you to get vaccinated, or young people?
Oh gosh, I don't think I've got an answer to that, but I do think that people who are like social media influencers could really be using this as a positive way to share the message that actually this is something that we should engage with and combat the misinformation that is floating around, you know, the web, and use this as a chance to say, hey, look, I got the vaccine and I'm fine, and I'm healthy.
Wonderful.
And
I was really heartened to see a Black healthcare professional being one of the first people, being the first person in the US to get vaccinated. Yeah, how important do you think it is for people to see people of color actually having the vaccine?
I think it's incredibly important. I think that role modeling, representation, you just can't overestimate the power of it. I think that rightly and understandably, so many people of color do not trust medical research and science because of what's happened in the past. We can't get away from that. It's the truth. It happened. And also, I think one of the things is that an example is the Tuskegee syphilis trial, which is an example in which Alabama sharecroppers had syphilis and were monitored and weren't given treatment and developed awful side effects, etc. But I think some of the things that people don't realize, and people forget, actually, should I say, is that the governments were involved in that as well. And so there's a lot of fear from government, from medical science and research. And so when you have people of color saying, we know this, we acknowledge this, but things have changed significantly, and whatever is happening in the research world now, there is scientific rigor and trust within the scientific field. I think that's powerful. And I think that it's something that I'm really glad to see that it's happening here and in the United States as well.
Absolutely. And in terms of some of the things that I've been hearing in WhatsApp groups, obviously these are people's genuine concerns. One thing I've heard is that the vaccines are designed to make people infertile and also changes their DNA? What would you say to someone who thinks that?
I would say it doesn't, and I would be really clear on that. And I think that what the issue with the DNA is because of the term mRNA, and so as soon as people hear that and it's anything to do with DNA, there's an assumption that's made. And again, we know that this isn't like malicious assumptions, but we can understand where these concerns come from. But it does not alter your DNA. As I said, the mRNA is used to trigger your immune response. It does not affect fertility. We know that it has gone through many processes to ensure that it is safe to use. So it is safe to use. Trust that it is safe to use.
Yeah.
One thing that we're hearing a lot is that this vaccine has come around so quickly, much faster than other vaccines. Is that something that we should be worried about?
No. So as mentioned before, the reason it's happened so quickly is the enormous amount of funding and effort that's been put into this. So what would normally take 10 years, because of all the money that's been put in, and in the UK, the government's put in £6 billion into research into a vaccine for COVID. So it's the fact that we've had the resource, we've had the collaboration internationally, we've had the lack of red tape in terms of just getting through committees. It's still as rigorous as any other vaccine. It's just gone through quicker because there's been more will politically.
And another question that's come through: could the vaccine interfere with hormone therapy for trans people?
As far as we know now, in terms of what we said before, is that there should be no interaction with that. So, but again, what I always say is that please do make sure that you inform your GP or whoever administers the vaccine so that they have a complete understanding of what you're taking and what's involved in your life. So because and don't assume they know everything. Please be proactive in giving them that information. But as we know now, there is no interaction.
Okay, wonderful. And a question for you, Mercy. Where would you want to have the vaccine? Would it make a difference to you?
I don't think it would at this point. I think when I was younger, I would have wanted to have the vaccine, you know, in the HIV clinic setting. But nowadays, you know, my GP knows and we talk about it, and, you know, I'm happy to have it anywhere. But I think it's really important that people do actually think about that. And if it is something that is concerning them, that they actually discuss that with their clinicians and see if there's ways around it.
Mm-hmm. And thank you. And Jide, would it make a difference to you in terms of where you got it?
I wouldn't mind if I would take the vaccine in front of my entire congregation, and just to show that it's okay and it's safe. And I think that the same example has been done when it comes to HIV, where religious leaders have taken an HIV test publicly, in order to reassure their congregation and followers that it's okay to take a test, and things like that. But at the same time, I think that what is important is to build the trust and ensure that there's enough visibility, there's enough access to good, clear information, and let's get rid of all the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. An important question that's come over: were Black and brown people involved in the vaccine trial? And do you know if there are any brown or Black people living with HIV involved?
So yes, there were Black and brown people involved in vaccine trials. In terms of people living with HIV, I don't know, and Vanessa might, but as we've already said, there are no biological differences between Black people and brown people and white people. So there's no reason why the vaccine would work differently in them.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add to that, Vanessa?
No, completely agree. But there has been a lot of work being done to make sure that there's diverse representation and participation in the trials, and I think that's also to just address this concern that is in the communities, that if there isn't full representation, then we can't trust it. So we encourage for everyone to get involved in the trials, and Black and brown people have been involved within the trials.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. A question for Mercy and Jide. What role can the HIV community play to get more people from diverse groups to sign up to clinical trials? And how can we get pharma companies to ensure people of colour are better represented in global clinical trials? So a two-part question. So
yeah. So one of my jobs currently is I work with an organisation to try and get better involvement of young people in clinical trials and create a framework that means that it's safer to do so. And I think it's about taking those opportunities where you perhaps can sit on committees, or you can speak to, people who run trials, like trial managers and stuff, to actually put to them that this is something that they should be thinking about and taking seriously. And I think in terms of pharma companies, it's about employing the tactics that have worked before and using them. I know we can't be in person and throw glitter bombs on people, but actually I think it's worth engaging in conversations with big pharma and saying that the inequalities that this has exposed and exacerbated are not good enough, and we have to continue to change the way clinical trials run so that others are included that are massively underrepresented.
Wonderful. Jide.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mercy. You spoke on my behalf, everything said. And I think that the first thing is that there should be a continuous focus group discussion within the HIV community to continue to address some of those issues and concerns and bring them up, and of course, present them back to the pharmaceutical. I think that the key word in all of this is nothing about us without us. It's not just here in England, but around the world, in Kampala, in Lagos, in Lilongwe and Indonesia, around the world. Pharmaceutical needs to understand the local context of people's lives and understanding so that we can carry everyone along. It's not rocket science, but it can be done.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And final question before I get to penultimate question. What can be done to speed up vaccination globally?
It's about political questions.
I was actually thinking when Rageshri said earlier on that the UK government have put billions of pounds into this. I think that the global rich country needs to put a lot more money into ensuring that we speed up vaccination globally. And I think when Mercy talked about the ability to access vaccination as soon as possible here in England, but then thinking about her friends and family in 2020 or 2024, that's not good enough. Let the rich countries invest in this and speed it up.
And I also think that we also need to put pressure on the governments of our global south, resource poor areas, to take that ownership and say, right, you go to the companies and say, we deserve better, our people deserve better, and advocate as well. So, and not always relying on others to do that for them. So I think because political will is so powerful. And as Rageshri said, we've seen that here. We've seen it when money and political will comes together. It's transformative. And so that's what we need there. That's what we need there.
Okay, wonderful. And I know UNAIDS and Stop AIDS are doing a lot of work in relation to that. So check out their websites. So one final question. If you could call on one celebrity to take the vaccine publicly to encourage people to have it, who would that be? So Vanessa, let's start with you.
So, to encourage them, or just for me to see? So I don't know if everyone will know, but there's an actor, Nicholas Pinnock, he was in Marcella and he's currently in an American TV show for life, and I'm quite obsessed. So yeah, I would be happy if he did it. That would persuade me even more. Yeah.
Rageshri?
So I was trying to think of some Asian celebrities. So all I could think of was goodness gracious me. So I would say Mira Sayal.
Yeah, there we go.
Fantastic. Jide?
I think for me it will be the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He has responded, in many ways to reassure people of progressive outcomes. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And finally, Mercy.
Yeah, for me, I think the most common conspiracy theories I've heard are that the vaccine is Bill Gates' plan to take over the world. So I think it would just have to be Bill Gates just to prove that he backs it. So
Excellent. Yeah, very clever. So we've run out of time, but huge thank you to all of you on the panel. Fielding so many questions. I think we've had an unprecedented amount of questions. So thank you so much, and especially you, Jide. So I really hope you make a swift recovery. I'd like to thank Matthew for just getting all of these questions over so speedily. I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank everyone who's watched and engaged and got their questions over. I'd like to thank Disruptive Live for their technical wizardry in making all of this happen. I mean, I'm sure this is not the end of the conversation. Please go to the aidsmap site for all of the information about HIV and COVID-19. And as soon as we hear more, we'll be getting it out there to you. So thank you all so much. Happy holidays, everyone. And I will see you in the new year when I'm back with Matthew for aidsmap chat. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.